Hey everybody, Carolee with Conversations with a Vet. Hope everybody's doing well today. I'm really excited. Got another wonderful guest for you all tonight. Welcome out there. Kirk, I see you. Appreciate you jumping in tonight. Jim, thanks you. Jason, as always, thank you very much. So hopefully everybody's doing well. Oh, looks like you're traveling, huh, Jim? Looks like a lot of fun. So let's get a little bit of music going. How's that sound? We can all do with some music, I think. And I'll just hit my my lovely go-to, which is some rock. We'll get that going. See if we can get that. All right, excellent. We'll turn that up a little bit. Make sure everybody goes out there, gets your coffee, your water, get that all prepared for you. Got a great guest. He is a Marine and a Naval Aviator. And while we wait for some more people to pop on, we're going to go ahead and just do a little bit of follow-up. So if you haven't already, we have Lee Deckelman's book. This is Internal Volume, and that is by Lee Allen Deckelman. A great read, very raw. And if you have an opportunity, pick this up. You can get it at Amazon. Also, we have a book by Jason Lee Morrison. That is The Perfect Fucking Life. Pardon my French. This is an anthology, so it's a lot of his thoughts while he was in combat, overseas, etc. And a great read. Again, thank you both, Lee as well as Jason, for providing those. Again, wonderful reads. So if you haven't picked them up, you can do so on Amazon. And obviously, we want to support our veterans any way that we can. So if you haven't done so, pick them up, give them a read, give them a shout out at their websites, and I'm sure they would really love that. Let's see. Hey, everybody. Okay, so let's go ahead. I want to go ahead and introduce my guest tonight, and his name is Paul Entrekin, and he has graciously agreed to join us. Great big shout out to everybody who has joined so far, and hopefully we will continue to grow the channel and grow our veterans watching. So let's go ahead and give Paul a great big welcome. Howdy.
Howdy.
How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here and swap some stories with my fellow veterans.
It's wonderful for you to do that. And thank you very much for your service as well as your sacrifices. Really appreciated everything that you have done for our country and for us as individuals.
I always tell folks, you're worth it.
Thank you. Well, and it's a big sacrifice. I mean, away from family, away from friends, missing holidays and birthdays. And so I recognize that, and I definitely appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead. You're a little bit blurry. Let's see if we can try and clear this up a little bit. We're going to shorten this out. That's a little bit better. Okay. You good with that?
I'm good. I'm not good till you're not good.
Okay. Excellent. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and shut this music down. We've got 4 out there right now. So thank you everybody for joining. And so, Paul, let's start a little bit and by talking about your childhood. Kind of basic, right?
Sure.
What was that about? How was that?
Very, very fortunate to have a couple of parents that were both veterans. My
Nice.
dad was in the Army Air Corps, as was my mom. And so I think there was probably something ingrained in me as a child. I'm not sure why that was. But and my family has a very strong military background. My father was also a Marine. I'm sorry, my grandfather was a Marine. he was in the Haitian campaign in the 20s
Oh,
and received the Navy Cross in Haiti.
oh, wow.
Yeah, so
That's amazing.
he was a no kidding hero.
That's amazing. That's awesome. And
But
definitely somebody to look up to.
yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the ways that I ended up in the Marine Corps myself after I had graduated from college. I had a typical, I think, upbringing, just nothing unusual about it in particular. I was in scouting. I was an Eagle Scout. Was in Air Force Junior ROTC in high school. Ran track, played baseball, was in the marching band. Did not play football, but as luck would have it, I ended up going to Auburn University and thought I was going to be a music major. To make a long story really, really short, I ended up being a football major instead.
From not playing football at all.
Yeah, well, I played Pee-wees, but not in high school. You couldn't be in the marching band and play football also. And so I had to make a choice. And I'd played drums since I was in the 4th grade, and I decided to stick with music and limited my athletic opportunities to, as I said, baseball and track. But my saving grace was that I had a little bit of speed. And when I went out for the football team at Auburn, I guess Coach Jordan saw something in me, what I'm not really sure, but I ended up playing 4 years for him and was in Shug Jordan's last senior class at Auburn and graduated in 76.
Wow. So probably running all those bases. What position did you play for baseball?
I was an outfielder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what were your stats? Do you recall for your hitting?
They were nominal. I'll just say that. I was not an all-star or anything like that, but I could hold my own and could play at the high school level. No way I would have even tried at the college level at all, but which makes it all the more curious as to why I would even think that I could walk on at an SEC powerhouse like Auburn and think I could play football.
Well, but you did it.
My saving grace was speed. I ran 440 and I was a sprinter in high school. I ran the 100, the 220, hurdles, and high jumped and that kind of thing. So a little bit of athletic ability, which was just enough to shallow out my very, very steep learning curve my freshman year at Auburn. As a matter of fact, I'm very proud to say that our 72 team was referred to by Coach Jordan as the Amazons. We beat Alabama 17-16 that year, and what has become the infamous Bama punt game.
Oh,
but yeah, it was quite a thrill to be able to play for Shug Jordan, and I started as a corner my first 2 years, but my true calling I think was as a safety, and I ended up playing safety my junior and senior year.
Okay, so were you studious?
No. My GPA was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I was putting myself through school, playing a varsity sport, and trying to do homework. And homework always seemed to lose the battle. So, a lot of folks graduate summa cum laude, magna cum laude. I like to tell folks I graduated laude how come.
Oh, that's wonderful.
How I made it through is only by the grace of God.
My gosh.
So anyhow, I graduated, had no idea what I really wanted to do. As it turned out, after my student teaching experience, I was not crazy about teaching and coaching for $12,000 a year.
Right.
Working 6 days a week, about 12 hours a day. So as I flailed around and tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life, through a series of happenstance circumstances, I ended up with a business card for the officer selection officer for the Marine Corps in Birmingham.
Wow.
And got in touch with him. He sent a staff sergeant up to North Alabama, where I was living at the time, my hometown of Decatur, Alabama. I was tested, and they offered me an aviation guarantee, to which I replied most stupidly that I was not interested in the Air Force, that I was only interested in the Marine Corps. Whereupon the staff sergeant informed me that the Marine Corps also had aircraft. So I said, oh, yeah, I'd like to take those tests too then.
So your scores were high enough to garner that kind of position then.
Yes, I made it. I made it through by the skin of my teeth. I think the OSO again saw something in me that I didn't know was there, and he pronounced me airdroppable and stream fordable, and said the Marine Corps needs this guy, and they gave me an aviation guarantee and sent me to OCS.
Wow. And it's really interesting that you did so well with the testing for it, but yet your actual education was not where it probably should have been.
Well, that's indicative that those tests are not weighted very heavily toward math and science and some other
Right. Yes, I understand that 100%.
The motto
And
was the Marines were looking for a few good men, not a few smart men. Obviously, they would never have let me in.
oh, that's hilarious. You know, yeah, well, so with that, it's interesting because how, there it is a few good men, but they're called, I mean, the nicknames that the Marines have obviously are plentiful, jarheads and so on and so forth. And crayon eaters. And of course, I have 2 Marine boys. So,
you know that we resemble a lot of those, and those nicknames are earned.
I do, yes. But what I love most about it is that Marines grab hold of those names and just live with them to the fullest.
Oh, absolutely. You have to embrace it. Otherwise, you'd have a miserable life.
Right. And so, one year for Christmas, my middle child was actually just finished boot camp. And so he was home for Christmas. And my oldest Marine was also home for Christmas. And so, they got a lot of edible crayons. A lot. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I think my oldest has a sweatshirt that has something about crayon eating something or other, contest or participant or something along those lines. So Tennessee Goddess, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. I see you out there. So you also said your mom had been in the military as well?
That's right. She was in the Women's Air Corps. That's how she and my dad met, as a matter of fact. She was from Iowa. He was from Alabama.
Okay.
And, they actually met in the service during World War II.
Wow. Oh, yeah. My husband said it was, so Killian's shirt, our oldest Marine, says USMC Crayon Eating Team. So, that is absolutely embracing. And, I just love it. And they tease too, the favorite color, purple because it's grape or, so on. It's very fun. The personalities of Marines, they're just so big from what I have seen. And I think that's great. Angry Sarge, welcome. Thank you for taking some time. I understand. Yep, I see you are at work, working hard. Appreciate that. So, all right. So what? So we know what brought you into the Corps, and how was your boot camp? What was that like?
Well, fortunately, I was in pretty good physical condition, having played college football. So officer candidate school was not terribly difficult from a physical perspective. And I was relatively prepared for the mental breakdown process that we would experience. So that was not a total surprise either. But clearly there were a lot of guys that were not prepared, either physically or mentally, for boot camp. And
Right.
They were attrited relatively quickly within just a very few days. I don't remember the number that we started with, but we were down to a platoon size unit relatively quickly for our 12 weeks.
And so yours was 12, and that included all the way up to graduation. It was 12 weeks.
That's correct. After the 12 weeks of training, boot camp, if you were, for officers for OCS, we were then commissioned as second lieutenants. And then
Wow.
the finishing school for Marine officers is the basic school at Quantico, which is also where OCS was. And so you go to the basic school for about 6 months, and you fine tune your leadership skills and really learn significantly more about the leadership aspect of being an officer. And a little more weeding out process takes place. Some sizing up of individuals, those that did not have a contract or a guarantee, like those of us that were aspiring naval aviators had, were competing. If they wanted to be a grunt, if they wanted to be artillery, whatever they wanted to be. Very few wanted to be in motor transport or supply or something like that. And that's where the weaker performers tended to trickle down to. So depending on how you performed in the basic school had a lot to do with the MOS you were eventually assigned.
Okay. And so would you say that your time at OCS had helped, obviously, as a leader, supervisor, manager, et cetera, in once you transitioned out back into civilian life?
More so my actual fleet experience, but that's your initial indoctrination as to Marine Corps leadership in particular and how it works as compared to what you might see in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, which is not, shall we say, not quite as intense. And I'm not, trying to cast any aspersion on the other services, but I don't think anyone would argue the fact that Marine Corps leadership training is much more intense. So you see that from the very beginning, from the sergeants, staff sergeants, gunnery sergeants that lead you through officer candidate school, where they break you down, just like the enlisted guys do at Parris Island or San Diego. It's much the same process, very, very little difference.
Okay.
But the breaking down process happens first. Your identity is taken away, and you learn the value of teamwork and being part of a unit versus an individual. And so you see and observe a lot of leadership skills from those enlisted guys that hold your hand and lead you through. And then on a little bit higher level, when you go to the basic school and you have captains and majors and lieutenant colonels that are doing the leading. So that's a Marine officer's indoctrination. By the time he actually gets to the courses where he's actually learning his MOS, he's had pretty close to a year's worth of leadership training. And so even though they refer to us as 90-day wonders or butter bars, those kinds of things, there is a little bit of leadership training that takes place. And those that it sticks with become pretty good leaders. And those that it doesn't stick with are probably going to be around for 3 or 4 years. And then when their contract's up, they're gone to do other things in the civilian world.
Right. And so once you got through OCS, then you joined the fleet.
No. After OCS, you go to the basic school.
Oh, okay.
Then after the basic school, right there at Quantico, then you're sent to learn your particular MOS. And in my case, that was to become a student naval aviator, and I was sent to Pensacola. So you go through the aviation indoctrination process. Your last big, thorough flight physical at NAMI, the Naval Aviation Medical Institute, was let's just somewhat call it an astronaut physical. It was very, very intense.
Oh, wow.
The last chance to check your eyes and ears and joints and everything else that there might be anything that would physically disqualify you from aviation service. Then there's a lot of classroom work. You learn some navigation skills, engineering, aerodynamics, a lot of ground school that takes place before you're then sent to one of the training squadrons where you actually are exposed for the first time to an aircraft. So there's a lot of school work that takes place, a lot of ground school work before you ever end up in your training squadron, where you're learning procedures and the monkey skills on actually how to operate the aircraft.
So from the time you started boot to the time you got to actually being able to get into the aircraft, how much time do you think had passed?
It was probably a year and a half, uh, about a year's worth of school and workup. And then, unfortunately, the Marine Corps has a really, really bad uh, track record of the pipeline is either full open or it's fully closed. They all these years they haven't quite figured out how to maintain a steady flow for the training process. So I
Uh-huh.
was actually in what they refer to as the pool, meaning you didn't have anything to do. Uh, they sent you to Pensacola and said, well, you're not going to start training for about 6 months. For some guys, it was 8 months.
Oh my
And
gosh.
you'd report in every Friday and, show that you were still alive. And they'd make you get a haircut if you needed one. And you might, do a little formation run with the other guys. And that was about it.
But they
So,
only had to do that once a week?
yeah, once a week.
Oh my
Once a
gosh.
week. And
Wow.
you could request assignment with a unit to keep yourself occupied. And I requested to go to my officer selection officer in Birmingham and help him recruit. And
Wow.
that turned out to be a really rewarding experience. I really enjoyed serving with my OSO. I've basically went around to college campuses with him, recruiting other future Marine officers. We were all dressed up in our uniforms and answered questions that the college kids had. And we were quite an asset to have a guy like me that had just finished OCS in the basic school waiting to start flight training. We could give the prospective officer candidates good, up-to-date information about what they could expect when they actually went to training.
Yeah. So was there ever a time with all that waiting that you just felt like, just you're going to go out of your mind?
No. Oh, no. I kept
Not at
myself
all.
busy, and the anticipation to start flight training was palpable. I was so, I think anxious is the right word, because I was eager to start, but there was a great deal of anticipation as to whether or not I would be one of the great percentage of folks that would attrite from flight training, either for just failure to not grasp aviation, not have the monkey skills. Any number of things can attrite you. Physiological issues. I think of the guys that I started flight training with, about 40% attrited
Oh, wow.
early on in the program. So about 60% of us actually made it through to getting our wings.
So when you say, for the layperson, monkey skills, explain.
Well, that's just your basic aeronautical ability to keep the airplane flying straight and level, to maintain a constant angle of bank, to keep the rudder pedal in the position it was supposed to be. Just basic airwork skills. Not surprising that. Let me back up for a second and refer to one of your previous guests, Jim Fingers. Fingers was one of those guys that was really, really a gifted flight student, because he already had prior flight time. He had already flown. He knew that he had those abilities, and he had that confidence. For a guy like me that had never actually been at the controls of an aircraft, you didn't know if you had that or not. And a lot of the flight students learned early on that they just simply did not possess those skills. And it's not a knock on them. It's something that you have or you don't have. It's like being, perhaps, let's say, a gymnast. You have that internal gyro that allows you to know what's upside down and what's right side up, or you don't.
Yeah,
And
I'm not one of those who knows that. I would.
so if you don't, it's the instructors figure it out pretty quickly, and so do you. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean when I refer to the monkey skills.
Okay. So where did it get the name? Do you know?
I think it has something to do with that particular reference comes from the astronaut training, because, as we all know, the first space vehicle that was sent up by the United States did not contain a person. It contained
A monkey. Yep.
and they had basically taught those monkeys some basic skills. So as a term not of endearment, that those talents were referred to as monkey skills.
So even a monkey can do it.
Yes, that's exactly what those that were disparaging were attempting to say. Yeah, even
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
How hard can it be, right?
Right. And so how hard was it really?
For me, the basic airwork part was pretty easy. One of the most difficult things for me during my early flight training was wiping the smile off my face. I was having a ball. I could maintain airspeed and altitude pretty well, keep the ball centered up, and so it was not a complicated thing. Learning procedures is difficult for everybody. You really have to apply yourself. You can't take any of that for granted. And as the training gets more and more advanced, the skill level goes up exponentially as well. But initially, for the basic FAM stage or familiarization, the basic airwork is relatively simple.
And did you guys have simulators that you went into prior to?
No, we didn't have any
No.
motion simulators. We had procedures trainers where it simulated the cockpit and lights and switches lit up, and you could practice pushing the right buttons and flipping the right switches, but no motion simulators at all. No.
Wow. Yeah, I wondered about that because when you talked about some of the training, like your physical being close to what what NASA would do, kind of took me to some of that as far as the big, what is that, where you sit in that spherical thing and then they fling you all over the place and to try and get you to get everything back into control. I can't remember what that is.
I know what that's called about, but I don't think we had those back then either.
Yeah. So once you were able to get into a plane, how did that go for you?
Shaky at first, not because of procedural knowledge or because of airwork once we were airborne. I had, for my first 12 flights, I had another Marine captain as an instructor, and he was from someplace up in the Northeast, as I recall. I think maybe Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
Why I'm going to pull the fingers here and just remember a name, and why I remember it, I don't know, but his name was Tom Stanmore. And you have to remember, I am from Alabama, and the accent that I had then is not the voice that you're hearing right now.
I can imagine.
I'll give you a little taste of that. Captain Stanmore would say, "Okay, call for taxi." And I'd say, "Ground, it's 3 Echo 1 2 3. We're ready for taxi." And oh my goodness. This guy sitting behind me, his kneeboard came sailing across the back of my head more times than I can count. And he's screaming on the intercom, "No, no, 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 no. You can't talk like that. Who the hell do you think you are? You're trying to sound like Chuck Yeager. What's your problem?" "Well, that's the way I talk, Captain Stanmore." "Well, you have to speak with better diction. You have to enunciate your words, and you got to talk faster." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." So I got a below average in communications procedures on my first couple of FAM flights, and I corrected that rather quickly.
It's amazing, isn't it? How you can, when you're told what you're doing wrong, then it's easy to correct, or easier to correct, and it takes a little bit of time. But when they don't tell you it's wrong, you're like, you don't understand, because it's something that you have lived with all the way up until that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did radio back in the 80s for a top 40 radio station in Reno, Nevada. And I remember the call signs were K, W, and Z. And so when I would read the call sign, and we always had a little check tape that the producer the next morning would grab it, review it, tell you what you did wrong, etc. And I would say W. And he's like, "That's not what it is. It's a W." And so I had to sit there and practice KWNZ instead of KWNZ. And it was like,
Yeah.
but I understand that the diction was very important, enunciating properly, the importance of that. And so I do understand what what he was saying, but I also understand how difficult it is to change your ways after so many years of speaking that way.
Well, with enough pressure, you'd be surprised how quickly you can change.
Right. Especially when you see you have a goal and you see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, you understand the importance of getting things straightened out.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Oh, that's funny. So, okay. So now you're flying and you've gone through some communication training, and how else did this go for you? What was the next step?
Everything went great. I was they say that Marines are slow, but they retain. And that was pretty true of me, but I was just fast enough to stay ahead of the curve. And I truly, truly knew from my very first flight that that's what I wanted to do. I absolutely loved it. And so I had a lot of incentive because I enjoyed it so much to study hard and get good grades. And that's exactly what they told us. Work hard, get good grades, and you'll get the aircraft of your choice.
Wow.
So after basic instruments and advanced instruments and precision aerobatics and formation training and all the things that you go through in primary, you come up for selection. And I had really, really good grades. I never got a down. I had a few below averages from time to time, but fortunately I had more above averages than below averages. And they don't even use aboves and belows these days. They grade totally differently now than they did back in those days.
Pass or fail.
Well, it's a numeric scale now. But anyway, so I believed them. And I did study hard and I did get good grades. And I knew that I was going to get pointy nose jets and I was going to go fly the F-4. And that was my dream airplane. And I was so excited and just couldn't wait. So at the appropriate time, I was called into the student control officer's office. Turned out another Marine. He was a captain. And he said, well, I have good news and bad news for you. And I went, rut-row. Okay. Well, what's the bad news? He said, the bad news is, in typical Marine Corps fashion, the jet pipeline is closed. No one is going fixed wing. So that's the bad news. The good news is your grades are so good you can pick whichever helicopter you want.
Oh my gosh.
I was not a happy camper. I just felt betrayed. It was like, promises made, gifts exchanged, that kind of thing. I was really looking forward to it. And it was quite a gut punch initially. So I hadn't even given helicopters any thought. And so I said, well, what do you fly in the fleet, sir? And as it turned out, he was a Huey pilot. And I said, well, tell me about the Marine Corps helicopters. Because all I knew was what little I had gleaned at the basic school and hadn't, as I said, really given helicopters much thought at all. For me, it was, am I going to fly the Hornet? Am I going to fly the A6? Which of those jets am I going to choose? Or which one will choose me? So he basically told me the merits of the Huey, the merits of the Cobra, the 46 and the 53, which were the 4 Marine Corps helicopters at the time, and also the drawbacks for each one. And I chose Hueys. So here in Pensacola, you do all your fixed wing training at North Whiting Field. And then if you're chosen for helicopters, you stay at South Whiting Field for your intermediate and advanced training. So I just moved across the airport down to my initial helicopter squadron, which was HT-8. And they put you in a TH-57 Bell Jet Ranger, which is, they're still flying some of those to this day, but it's being phased out with another helicopter right now. And again, I had a pretty bad attitude, but I was there and I was going to do my best to make the most of it. And on my very first couple of flights, I learned quickly that helicopter flying is not easy. It's quite complicated to learn how to hover. You're working your hands, your feet. I used to tell people it's kind of like trying to ride a bicycle and shave at the same time.
Oh, wow.
A lot of stuff going on, and you better really know what you're doing, and you better pick it up quickly. So once I got immersed into the helicopter training, then I really started to enjoy it, and then I came to love it because I realized that helicopter pilots got kind of a bad rap. The song and dance was that if you got bad grades, you went helicopters. If you got good grades, you went jets. But that wasn't always the case.
Right.
So, and I was totally unprepared for how difficult it would be to learn how to fly a helicopter. So it was, being a drummer did help a little bit with that. That's for sure.
Using your hands and your feet at the same time. Both sometimes.
So after I finished with that helicopter training, I moved to HT-18, which was advanced helo training, where we flew the Huey, the single engine Huey. They had UH-1 Echoes and Limas, some of which were Vietnam era aircraft that you could see when you pre-flighted the airplane. There were patches where there'd been bullet holes. And, but I was finally in my element. I was getting a little bit of a taste of what it was going to be like to fly the Huey in the fleet, and received my wings in HT-18 and was sent to my first choice of duty station, which was Camp Pendleton, where I went through the training element out there, which is the helicopter version of what the fixed wing guys would call the RAG, or replacement air group.
Okay.
And that's where I had my first experience with the twin engine Huey, the UH-1N, or the November model. So that was my first fleet aircraft, was the UH-1N.
And what did you think of that one?
Oh, I loved it. It was had so much more power than the training Hueys that we had flown. And the training out there was absolutely outstanding. The fleet training was things that you really needed to know on a day-to-day basis. So that was a lot of fun. And about the time I had really gotten myself established in my first fleet squadron, which was HML 267, the Marine Corps decided that it made a lot of sense to have all their H-1s composited into squadrons, meaning they took the attack guys, which were the Cobras, the HMA squadrons, and put them composite with the HML squadrons. And so I was in one of the first groups that composited, and I left 267 and went to the gunfighters of HMA 369, which had theretofore previously been a Marine attack helicopter squadron. So now all of the Marine helicopter squadrons, the H-1 squadrons, had both Hueys and Cobras. And back in those days, they flew the J model Cobra. And the benefit of that was that even though you might not have a NATOPS check for me being a Huey pilot, I wasn't checked out. I couldn't sign for a Cobra, but I had the benefit of flying a lot in Cobras as well. So that was really, really sweet to get to fly both Hueys and Cobras. So
which was your favorite?
Oh, the Huey. I liked the Huey because it was far more versatile. We did just about everything you could possibly do in support of the grunts, whereas the attack guys were pretty much just that. They were attack and some close air support, but mainly just attack. And whereas the Hueys did all kinds of things to support the grunts. We hauled them around. We carried their gear. We had them slung underneath our aircraft in spy rigs. We also fired missiles and rockets and guns, and we did a little bit of everything. So
fun stuff.
The Huey was, as far as the mission capability, was far superior. So I really, really enjoyed that. And so I enjoyed being in the Stingers of HML 267. I really enjoyed being a gunfighter in 369. And while I was out on the West Coast, I went to TACP school, which is Tactical Air Control Party, commonly known as FAC school. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed acquiring that tertiary MOS as a FAC, or forward air controller. And I was also sent to Monterey to the Naval Postgraduate School for the Aviation Safety Officer course there, which was also a ton of fun. So I can honestly say that all the time that I spent at Pendleton and on the West Coast, I went to great schools. I got some really, really fun flight time. We did a little bit of ship operations out in the Pacific, not a whole lot. Mostly we deployed to Okinawa and did our 6-month deployments over there, and then branched out to different places such as Korea and things like that. And at the end of that time, this would have been, oh my goodness, the mid 80s, I was thinking, well, I like flying helicopters. I'm going to be a helicopter pilot. And I could see myself doing that as a career. And as you've heard, no doubt, countless times by a lot of your guests, when you get your fitness reports, at the bottom of your fit rep, you get to write what you would like to have for your next duty station. Well, sometimes you're realistic and sometimes you throw a couple things in there. You get to pick 3. And I tossed in a exchange tour with the Canadians. And I thought,
Wow.
I won't get it, but who knows? Well, I got it.
Wow.
So the next thing I know, I find myself up at Cold Lake up in Alberta. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? What kind of helicopters are they going to have on station here that I'll be assigned to fly? And much like naval aviators, the way they train their pilots up in Canada, everybody starts out in fixed wing first. So they consider their pilots to be unrestricted as well. And they said, no, you're going to fly fixed wing while you're here. And all I saw on the flight line were jets. And they said, yeah, we're going to put you in 419 Squadron. You're going to fly the F-5 first. And I said, okay. And so I got checked out in the F-5, and I flew with those guys for a while.
Were you nervous the first go round?
Oh, no. It was a very, very easy airplane to fly, and it was a lot of fun. So I was just thrilled that I had the opportunity. And the Canadian guys were absolutely a blast to fly with. They were so much fun. And then I was assigned to 410 Squadron, which flew the F-18. And this was the Canadian version of the Legacy Hornet. So there I was flying pointy nose jets after all. And my
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. Who knew? You can't plan this kind of stuff. Next thing I knew, I was back in Pensacola as a flight instructor. So I was very, very blessed during my time in the fleet to be able to fly jets, helos, and turboprops. So very blessed.
And so when you were a flight instructor back in Pensacola, was that still with the Marine Corps at that time?
Yes, I was in a Navy squadron, of course. All the primary training squadrons are Navy squadrons, but we had Marine instructors, Coast Guard instructors, Navy instructors. The COs rotated. You'd have a Navy CO for a while, then his XO would be a Marine, and then you'd have a Marine CO, and his XO would be Navy, and they kind of rotated like that. So yeah, I was instructed in the aircraft that I had learned to fly in, the T-34 Charlie, and just absolutely loved it. I made the comment multiple times that if they did just let me stay a captain in the Marine Corps for 20 years, I'd have stayed right there and done nothing but that. I loved it so much. And it was just so rewarding to take a student with no experience whatsoever in an airplane and teach them those basic monkey skills that I referred to.
Mm-hmm.
And when you watch them solo and come back and you have the tie cutting ceremony, it really instills a sense of pride in you. And to see the sense of achievement and satisfaction in them was tremendously rewarding. I really, really, really enjoyed that so much. I can't describe how much I enjoyed it.
And that proud papa moment, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and share with you right now. At least 5 of my students that I know of went on to become Blue Angels. So not taking any credit
Wow.
for that, but I'm saying somewhere in the process, I must have done a little something right to keep them on the right track.
I would say so because, if they didn't have respect and commonality with you, it wouldn't be so easy to continue on, right?
Well,
You know, in
I
a
was
lot
a
of
little
the
bit, I was a little bit different than some of the other instructors. We had a couple of screamers in the squadron, but I was kind of known as a Santa Claus. And once your reputation gets out, you have guys that look forward to flying with you if you have that reputation. And one of my strange little quirks was uh, after we had briefed and we went out to the aircraft, and the student normally did the pre-flight. Before we got up in the cockpit, I'd say, now, before you go fly with me, you have to have a smart pill. Of course, they'd look at me with this strange look like, uh-oh, where's he going with this? And I'd say, there's a bag of them in my helmet bag there. Before you go fly with me, you reach in there and grab a smart pill, and then we'll go fly. And they were like, uh-oh. And all it was,
what are we in for?
it was a bag of bubble gum, and they grabbed a piece of bubble gum, and it served a couple of purposes. It was a good icebreaker, and if they had any problems clearing their ears on climb out, it helped to be able to chew on some gum as well. So I just really, I loved what I did. I think it showed to the students. Although there might have been a couple that were deserved, I never gave a down as a flight instructor. And come to think of it, there probably were a couple that I should have given a guy down, but I gave him a break. But never had any significant problems with any of my students. And I took a lot of pride and satisfaction in that. But it was truly, truly rewarding to be an instructor of student naval aviators. I can't overemphasize that.
So do you think living in the South, being from the South, that made a difference in how you treat people with, your students, a little more respect? You're not the screaming, yelling, I mean, do you think that might have had anything to do with it?
No, not really. I don't think
No.
your geographic roots really had much to do with that. It's all personality. You're either a laid back person or you're high strung. And some of the more high strung instructors tended to be the screamers. They had less patience and less tolerance. And the more laid back guys would let students go a little bit farther, let them make more mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And I think that was the difference, not necessarily their geographic roots.
That's fair. So was there ever a moment during your time that you just were fed up, just kind of exacerbated with everything, or was it all just smooth sailing?
Wow. What a fortuitous time for you to ask that question, because as my time was winding down as a flight instructor, I was under the impression, based on previous conversations with the monitor, which for Marines, we have a monitor. For the Navy guys, they had a detailer, but they're one and the same job responsibility. I was told to anticipate that I would go to a fleet fixed wing squadron because of my exchange tour with the Canadians. And I was really looking forward to going back to the fleet to fly the Hornet. Well, as it turned out, the old needs of the Marine Corps story came up again. And I was told that I was needed as an air officer for a battalion. I just recently been selected for major, and was really tickled with that. But as a field grade officer, I knew that I had to get my feet wet in the fighter community really quickly because I had a lot of catching up to do. Well, I knew that if I went to a battalion not flying for 3 solid years, which was what this set of orders would entail, that there was no way after that I was going to get assigned to a fixed wing squadron as a mid-grade major new guy. It just wasn't going to work. That would doom me forever making lieutenant colonel. So I thought, now what am I going to do? I've got to make a decision. If I decide to stay in, these are my options. If I decide to get out, these are my options. And So I got a little frustrated with the inflexibility of the Marine Corps system and the way it worked. But 'twas ever thus. I'm not the first guy that's happened to, and certainly
Ah,
won't be the last. It's just the way it is. The needs of the Marine Corps always come first.
and
Uh,
they're always ever changing.
that's true. That's very true. So I made the decision to go ahead and get out of the Marine Corps, and decided I was going to go into business for myself.
Wow. So your total time in was for how long?
At that stage, I was 10 years and some change, but I did stay in the individual ready reserve, and so continued on. I didn't totally cut the cord. I just was no longer on active duty per se. And I will share with you. Have to backtrack a little bit. I mentioned that I was a FAC, a forward air controller for a battalion while I was out at Pendleton. And on one of our exercises, when we were part of the Rapid Deployment Force, I was shipboard for a couple of weeks, and didn't have a lot to do. My little group of guys was all trained up and ready to go, and they had a couple of helicopter landing spots on this ship. So I went up and helped this Navy lieutenant that needed the help. And in the wardroom, I had a lot of spare time, and I kept noticing these civilian guys that were there, and I noticed them noticing me, and thought that was a little unusual that they had these guys aboard the ship. But I thought they're probably technical advisors of some kind. And again, to make a long story a little bit shorter, it turned out that these were guys from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And we got to know each other a little bit over that couple of weeks in the wardroom, and they asked me a lot of questions. They didn't give me a lot of answers, but they asked me a lot of questions. And then toward the end of this exercise, I was just asked point blank if I had any interest in participating in Defense Intelligence Agency activities, to which I replied affirmatively. And they said, okay, well, we'll be in touch. I said, great, thanks. And didn't think much else of it. Not too long after I returned to my squadron, my CO called me in, and it was one of those shut the door moments. And he said that he'd been contacted and that I made a pretty good impression with these guys, and if I was agreeable to go into some additional training. And I said I was. And so I can't talk a whole lot about what that training involved, but I was trained to be an operative with the Defense Intelligence Agency. And as luck would have it, when I left active duty, I just fell right into the mold of exactly what they were looking for. And I mentioned that I was going to go into business for myself. As a flight instructor, one of the areas that I taught was precision aerobatics. Now, in the military, when you're teaching guys aerobatics, the hard deck is 5,000 feet. You don't do anything below 5,000. So rolls, loops, half Cubans, spins, anything that you do that's considered aerobatic is all done above 5,000. But I had a lot of confidence in my own capabilities, and I had been to a lot of air shows, taking T-34s as a static display aircraft, and had gotten to know a lot of the civilian performers and had watched them very, very closely. And I knew there was no doubt in my mind that I could do what those guys were doing. So I took my little nest egg that I'd saved up and bought myself a Pitts S2B, which is a little aerobatic biplane. And when I say little, it's pretty little. About all they're good for is air shows. And I bought one brand spanking new from the Kristen Industries plant in Afton, Wyoming, and was in the process of working up my air show routine, because now I'm going to be doing those same aerobatic maneuvers instead of up at high altitude, meaning above 5,000 feet. I was going to be doing all that stuff down close to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So I really had to work hard to make sure that I was being safe and efficient and thorough. And the vast majority of this was self-taught. In the process of that, one of my Canadian friends called me up and said, I think I've found the air show niche that you need. I said, great, what's that? He said, how about a MiG? I said, yeah, how about a MiG? He said, no, I read an article in Canadian Aviation Magazine that there's some guy up here that's going to import some MiG-17s. We had a good laugh about that because we both thought that no way that's going to happen. Because at that time, there were no MiGs flying anywhere in the free world, except for some classified locations, which most, if not all of your listeners and viewers are very, very well aware of. So he said, it's only going to cost you a phone call. Why not? I said, okay, I can make a phone call. I called this guy up in Canada. His name was David Chow. And he said, well, these 5 MiG-17s are going to be shipped into Burlington, Vermont. I said, okay, well, why not Canada? He said, well, it's illegal to import these types of aircraft into Canada. But he was of Chinese ancestry and had some family over in China. We had normalized relations with China. And he made arrangements to have them shipped to Burlington. So his story was making sense. I said, how about maintenance? How am I going to maintain an aircraft like this? He said, you're on your own. Said, well, that could be a deal breaker right there. So you remember back in the days when we had a Rolodex?
Yes.
I'm not talking about the kinds you wear on your watch. Not a Rolodex,
no.
A Rolodex where you kept all your little, yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
I referenced that, and I found a card for a guy in Chino, California that ran a little museum and maintenance facility. And I knew that they took care of T-33s and F-86s and other types of that era of jet aircraft. And I asked him if he could maintain a MiG-17. And he said that he felt that he could, provided he had the adequate parts and manuals and things. And he said, but what would you think about having a MiG-15 instead? And I said, that's all well and good, but where am I going to find one of those? He said, well, I just happen to have 5 of them, and they're sitting on the dock in Long Beach right now getting ready to go through customs.
What in the world? All of these MiGs are just dropping in your lap.
I'm thinking this is way too good to be true. So I said, I'm going to come talk to you. So I hopped on an airplane, flew out to California, saw the aircraft with my own eyes. We did a deal. He allowed me to make some very creative payments for the aircraft because he said, everybody, when this aircraft hits the market, everybody is going to say, where did you get that jet? And you're going to say, I got him from this guy, and he's got 4 more ready to go. So he knew it would be good for him as well as good for me. So we did a deal, went to the FAA and said, we want to certificate these aircraft. And the FAA laughed at us, and they said, no, that's not going to happen. Well, we eventually persisted, and they ran out of reasons not to. And they said, tell you what, take the wings off the aircraft, truck it out to a remote area. And what they were saying without saying it was take it to Mojave, California, which is just outside of Edwards Air Force Base out in the high desert. They said, you put 15 hours on the aircraft and don't kill yourself or break the airplane, we'll certificate you and the jet.
Wow.
So we said, deal. So I became a fledgling test pilot. We interpolated data from the T-33 and the F-86, came up with numbers that we thought would closely resemble what you could expect from the MiG-15. I was given a test card and went up and flew anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes and came back with the data on what the aircraft would really do. And so we put all that together in the form of manuals, because what we had were the manuals that came with the aircraft, which were Russian translated into Chinese with an attempt to translate into English. And a lot of what we read was like reading a comic book.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm not kidding you. There were times when the mechanics would get so confused and frustrated, they would take what we had down to the local Chinese restaurant and say, "What does this say?" That's how some of our guys learned what the data was in those manuals. So we put everything we had together and submitted it to the FAA along with a schedule of maintenance, and they said, "Okay, you're good to go." And so I became the first civilian in the world to own and operate a Russian fighter.
And how long did it take from start to finish to get the required time that they were looking for in flight?
We took our time, and we spent about a month putting all the data together and getting all the flight information. For example, it said very clearly in the manuals not to spin the aircraft, but any pilot knows that sometimes spins are inevitable, whether you do it intentionally or unintentionally. I think what they were trying to tell folks was don't do it on purpose. But I had to do it on purpose to find out what it would do in the clean configuration, meaning with the gear up, flaps up, what it would be like in the dirty configuration, meaning gear and flaps down, just gear down, just flaps down. All that had to be determined. And so I had a couple of close calls, and they weren't kidding when they said it's not a good idea to spin the MiG series. The 15.
Did you try and do it below 5,000 feet?
No. These things were all done at altitude.
Just check.
And I'll tell you a really, really funny story. Before I ever put the first flight on the aircraft, I had read Chuck Yeager's book entitled Yeager. And chapter 13, as I recall, is entitled Outflying the Russians. And he talks about his time on Okinawa when he and Tom Collins were the evaluating pilots, or test pilots, if you will, for the MiG-15 that Ken Rowe defected in. And I thought, gosh, Yeager's got to know more about that airplane than I'll ever know. So maybe he could tell me something that would keep me from killing myself. So back in the day, this was before cell phones, when you could just call directory assistance. I knew that he lived in Grass Valley, California. I called him up, got his number, and his wife Glennis was still alive at the time, and she answered the phone. I put on my best good old boy Southern drawl voice and asked to speak to the general, and she reluctantly got him to the phone. And about maybe 2 minutes into the conversation, where I was about to make my ask, he lit into me, and he called me everything but a nice guy. He was ripping me a new one. And it turned out what he had clued in on were a couple of different words, such as Chino, California, and MiG, and some other things. And it turned out that he unfortunately had a feud with a guy that ran a museum there in Chino. He used to fly their P-51 Mustang, and for insurance reasons, is what I was told, they had to terminate that relationship, and Yeager was not happy about it. So he thought this guy, Ed Maloney, had put me up to contacting Yeager to see if Yeager would come down and do some test flying in a MiG-15, which of course was not the case at all. And once he took a breath, and I was able to convince him that I didn't even know who Ed Maloney was, and I wasn't asking him to fly the airplane. I just wanted some guidance on, some maybe critical do's and don'ts. And he relaxed after that, and he said, "Well, you got your shiny switches and you got your rusty switches." He said, "Don't touch the rusty ones."
They're rusty for a reason.
That's probably a pretty good advice. He mentioned one in particular, the TO&E switch, takeoff and emergency switch. And he said, "Don't touch that sumbitch. It'll blow the ass in, plumb off the airplane." And it's like, okay, write that one down.
Yeah, just tape it shut.
I met him. I related this story to another Delta pilot friend of mine some years later. And he got a good laugh out of it. And it turned out he and Yeager were very, very good friends. And he actually introduced us face to face up at a Gathering of Eagles event up at the Air Command and Staff College at Maxwell Air Force Base near Montgomery. And Jaeger got a good laugh out of it, and I did too. And we shared a glass of scotch, and we're somewhat friendly after that. So anyway,
good.
I did not have the advantage of much training or guidance or manuals. It was just, fortunately, the MiG-15 was a very, very basic aircraft, and by virtue of the eating the elephant one bite at a time and just doing a little bit of test flying, typically flight was about 30 minutes with internal fuel and no drop tanks. We were able to get my confidence and comfort level up and learn everything that we needed to know about a simple old first generation jet fighter. And the rest, as they say, is history. I was off to the races in the air show industry and flew the MiG-15 on the air show circuit for 3 solid years.
What years were those?
This was in the late 80s and early 90s. Most of the late 80s. I ended up being hired by Delta in 1989. I thought that I would probably be able to stay in the air show business full time, but I learned very quickly there's a reason that the Blues and the Thunderbirds and the Snowbirds limit those guys to 2 and 3 year tours, because it's a gypsy lifestyle. You're on the road an awful lot. It's really tough on your family life. And if you're doing, 20, 25, 30 show sites, you're pulling G's a lot. You're putting a lot of stress on the aircraft. And I didn't have a huge support crew. So even though it was an older vintage type jet aircraft with dry wings, meaning no fuel in the wings, it still required a modicum of maintenance. And it occurred to me that doing air shows with that frequency and trying to do that for a longer career was, even though it was very lucrative, was probably not advisable. So when I was hired by Delta in 89, I was able to make my airshow flying an avocation, which many airshow pilots do. And I could still do 8 to 10 show sites a year and maintain the level of proficiency that I needed to stay safe. So I was able to have the best of both worlds.
So did you ever do the air show at Stead, Nevada?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I did.
And do you recall what year that might have been? Because I might have seen you.
I don't remember what year I was at Reno. I really, really don't. I only did 2 shows in the state of Utah. I did one at Wendover, which was west of Salt Lake. It was an old World War II training base, and at Reno. Those were the only 2 places I flew in Utah. But I should have laid out a qualifier earlier that I don't have the kind of retention that Fingers had. When I sat and listened to his podcast with you, his ability to recall things and numbers and dates and
he had all those visual cues too, which was the hats and the
that was nothing short of amazing to me. And as I said, I can't even remember what year I flew the Reno Air Show. So, but
that's okay.
I flew Oshkosh too, and I can't even tell you what years I flew Oshkosh.
So in the very early 90s, I actually was working for a worldwide corporation there in Stead, Nevada. And the airstrip there, where once a year they hosted air shows. And it was like, it was just crazy. The sounds, and the building would shake. I mean, so intensely. It was almost like an earthquake, but it wasn't, right? It was just that intense. And there were some, as you said, some pointy-nosed planes out there to start. I remember. And of course, we had, I think it was the Blue Angels. What's the other one that's out there?
Well, they had
Um,
the Blues, the Thunderbirds, the
the
Snowbirds.
the Thunderbirds might have been.
Yeah, they've all done the Reno Air Show.
Yeah. And of course, we could see from the second story of the building, we could see the whole race, which was quite impressive. So, I mean, I'm just kind of envisioning you in this MiG. So,
Well, I never raced the big. I just strictly did air shows in it.
but
But
even still, I can just
yeah,
picture you inside. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty neat.
it was so much fun. I just can't describe. And I use the word fun a lot, as you've already seen
Hmm.
when I describe my aviation career, whether it was being a flight instructor or flying air shows. I had an awful lot of fun. And those of us that have been career aviators will tell you that, as they say, anytime you can do something that is that enjoyable, you never work a day in your life.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there weren't some times that were stressful and taxing. But for the most part, getting paid to fly airplanes is a really, really sweet deal. What a scam.
And to go from not being able to fly those pointy nosed planes in the Marines initially, and just how things evolved over time for you, I think is a wonderful story. It just in and of itself, and how much you enjoyed learning the different things that you might not have had that opportunity had things worked out the way you wanted initially.
That's for sure. Yeah.
So, how long then were you in the reserves?
I stayed in the reserves until a short time after Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And after that, I realized that had been my opportunity. And that combined with my Defense Intelligence Agency service afforded me the opportunity to go ahead and retire, which I did. And I have to be so cautious with what I say and don't say.
Right. And that's okay. We understand. So,
One of those guys that can tell you that anytime you request permission to talk about some of your experiences, in most cases, it's certainly going to be easier to get forgiveness and permission.
right.
In my first book, I sent out what I wanted to write about my time in Syria, and it came back so heavily redacted. It was basically what they were trying to tell me was, you don't need to be writing about this.
Hello, my name is.
Yeah. But suffice to say that I was an operative with Defense Intelligence Agency. I served some time on an operation in Syria, and it did not end well, but I made it home, and
well, and we're glad that you did.
By the grace of God.
Yeah, we're glad that you did. So you've written a book.
A couple.
Did it publish?
Actually, 3, yeah.
3 books.
My first book is called Mighty Hands, and that does not refer to my hands. That refers to a higher power, because my life has been, especially not just as an aviator, but in other ways as well, has been checkered with so many different things that I shouldn't be here right now. And it's only through divine intervention that I am still here. There's absolutely no doubt whatsoever about that. But I started to write some of these things down because I knew that as many aviators do, especially military guys, I spent so much time away from home, and my kids didn't know where I was. They didn't know why Dad was not home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthdays. And I wanted them to have some record of where Dad had been. So I put pen to paper, and it was a bit of a catharsis too, to put some of those thoughts down, to recount some stories of close calls and extreme happiness, extreme sadness, and all the different emotions that I experienced when I was away from them. And I had a couple of very, very close, trusted friends read the manuscript, and to a person, they indicated that there was one particular section in the book where I wrote pretty much exclusively about my time with the MiG in particular, that was so aviation technical. They said, we don't know who your target audience is or who your target reader is, but chances are you're going to lose them in this section of the book. So I completely culled that out of Mighty Hands, which turned out to be pretty much an autobiographical memoir. And the part that I culled became a standalone book, which, as luck would have it, became a bestseller, and that's Mr. MiG. So the subtitle of Mr. MiG is The Real Story of the First MiGs in America. And what I did was chronicle my experience, the history of the MiGs that have been brought into the free world, and who and how and all the particulars, and some anecdotes and mostly true stories.
That's awesome. So that's 2 books. Now, you said you've written 3.
The third book was written on a lark. It's called Jasper and the Christmas Fairies. And that started with my grandson, who is now 10. This was about 5 years ago during the holiday season. He was here at the house, and as you can kind of see from the background, we've got very tall ceilings in our great room. Mm-hmm. And I had some laser lights up on the ceiling that we used to have outside. And it was nighttime. We're watching some Christmas special on TV, and Everett had climbed up in the recliner with me, and we're tilted back a little bit watching this show. And he happens to notice those laser lights for the first time. And he says, "Grandpa, what's that?" Well, if you know anything about me, you know that I can't just tell a kid a straight answer. I've got to embellish. So I did, and I concocted this story about Christmas fairies, and he bought the whole thing hook, line, and sinker. And some of the family, as they were walking past the chair, was eavesdropping a little bit, overheard me telling him this story, and they said, "That was really cute. You ought to write that down." And so I did. And it became a Christmas story that's told from the perspective of my Labrador retriever, Rufus. And he talks about what he sees on this Christmas Eve. And we have a donkey. Here, I live on a ranch. We've got about 80 acres. We have a couple of Clydesdales and a donkey and some Texas horns and all manner of critters. And so the story is about this our donkey, Jasper, and his encounter with these Christmas fairies. And so anyhow, my wife is a school administrator at a local elementary school. She's an assistant principal. And I leaned heavily on her to make sure that we wrote it in a way that a lap sitter that's not quite yet a reader could understand. And so it's a book designed for little ones to sit in your lap during the holidays and look at the pictures while somebody reads them the story, and they can follow along and learn how to read a little bit perhaps themselves. But anyway,
that is awesome.
Jasper and the Christmas Fairies.
I have them all written down. So where can we find these 3 books?
Anywhere fine books are sold, as they say. Mainly folks get them from Amazon.
Okay.
But
all right.
Through Barnes and Noble, and other booksellers can get them to you as well.
Excellent. So again, that's Mighty Hands, Mr. MiG, and Jasper and the Christmas Fairies. So if any of you are watching out there in the chats or later during the recorded version, feel free, check them out. Always want to help out a fellow veteran. So let's go ahead and get that taken care of right now. Also, I'm going to put that out there. So we're going to be coming up when we hit 500 subscribers. We're going to be doing another giveaway. And so for the first giveaway, it was at 100 subscribers, and we had the 2 books that I showed at the beginning from Jason Morrison as well as Lee Deckelman. They had done signed copies to the winners for that. So we'll be in contact. See what we can do with that. I think that would be great. you had already joined, or excuse me, you'd already been doing the air shows. You've been hired by Delta. So, can I make the assumption then that your transition into civilian life was fairly simple?
I think so. It was more of the same from the family's perspective because, again, being an airline pilot, dad is gone quite a bit. Perhaps not as much as military deployments, but
Right.
gone with relative frequency nonetheless. It's not like the dads that come home every afternoon or evening at 5 o'clock and they're at home with their families every night. It's just what pilots do. You know,
Right.
we fly away, but we always fly back.
That's
So it
right.
was, but you know, if flying is in your blood, it is. And if you love flying, you do. And I did. And I had 30 wonderful years with Delta Airlines. Just like Fingers, I started out as a engineer on the 727, moved up to first officer on the 72, then captain. Then when they retired the 727, I moved to the 7576 and flew the 767-400 primarily, and then eventually upgraded to the 777, which was the aircraft that I retired from. So just, again, pinched myself every time I was up at cruising altitude. You're talking to the crew and
Yeah.
just saying, can you believe we're getting paid to do this? It was just such a blast, so much fun, and time away from home being the exception. But again, if you like flying airplanes, there's nothing better than having an aviation career, and to get paid to do something you would pay to do is very special.
Exactly. So, being that you have flown helicopters, especially with the Marine Corps and such, there has been a lot of unfortunate accidents that have happened with the helicopters. In your mind, would you say that there is any kind anything that the Marines could do better, or the Navy could do better as far as training goes to help alleviate some of those? Better maintenance, better upkeep? Just your opinion.
I think the first thing that you have to recognize is that naval aviation is inherently dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one of those things that Fingers touched on. And shipboard operations especially are far more dangerous than land-based operations. But all forms of naval aviation are dangerous, whether it's fixed wing or rotary wing. And I think that the military services have far superior maintenance standards than the civilians do, based on my observations after I got out of the military and what I saw from civilian maintenance. So I don't think that there's a shortcoming as far as maintenance goes. Material is the same. It's good. It's as good as they can make it. It's just an inherently dangerous job. And of course, the human factor comes into play. People make mistakes. And when you consider the vast numbers of flight hours that the military performs on an annual basis, as compared to the number of mishaps that are involved, it's actually pretty small. But I can't overemphasize the fact that you have to go back to the fact that military aviation is just inherently dangerous. The type of flying that is done, whether it's on night vision goggles at night, which was the case, as I understand, with the CH-53 that was lost back to Miramar not too long ago. Flying on NVGs is dangerous. Firing ordnance is dangerous. Flying in instrument conditions under certain circumstances can be inherently dangerous. Flying ship operations is dangerous. There just is very, very little in the way of military aviation that isn't dangerous. So it's just the nature of the beast, and you all know that when you sign up for it. So no, I don't have any criticisms of. Who knows? There might have been something in the command element that was a contributing factor. It could be that there were some maintenance issues for any particular mishap that were contributing factors. But as a naval aviator, I trusted our maintenance guys implicitly to give me, if they signed off on that aircraft and said it was good to go, as far as I was concerned, it was good to go. And I made mistakes. I tried to kill myself and others on more than one occasion. And there was nothing wrong with the aircraft. It was something wrong with me at the time. Maybe I just did something stupid. So stupidity comes into play. There are just any number of factors, and
it's unintentional.
Yeah,
I mean, to clarify that, because, and I think that for those non-military people that will watch this and hear you talk about flying helicopters and then the recent mishaps that we've had, I think it's important for them to hear that, really, I like the point that you made about the number of flight hours that the military has had in the course of however many years, and then the number of incidences. Yeah. I mean, everybody wants to say that it should never happen. Unfortunately, as you said, there are human factors involved, and sometimes there's things that occur, because I think there was some heavy snow, I think, for the last one.
Yeah, that's quite possible that there was some icing involved. It'll be very interesting to see how that accident investigation reports. But yeah, I think you're probably right on that.
And I think, and of course that, and coming in with those mountains, I mean, some of the highest mountains in this country are on the West Coast. So, coming in, you've got low visibility, you've got potential freezing, mountainous terrain. So a lot of things can happen. And, so then you're relying, of course, on your instrumentation, because you can't really see a whole lot other than Star Wars. Kind of like when you're driving in snow, yeah. It's really tough to see. So, and if something, maybe unfortunately, maybe a malfunction in some equipment, something's frozen, whatever the case may be, things will happen. But I think that you've made some really good points, and I hope that can help ease the minds of people who, one, may be considering becoming an aviator for the military, or two, just as a parent or family member who has people in the military that are doing that. And so I think that those are some really good points, and I really appreciate you saying so.
One thing that I will comment on, though, is one particular type of aircraft, the V-22 Osprey, has just been fraught with problems. And that aircraft has been, from concept, it's been around for over 40 years. And they're still having some very significant problems. And it's my understanding that this latest Osprey mishap they pretty much determined that it was a mechanical issue. And when Bell Textron came out with the V-22, it's just been fraught, as I said, with problems. A lot of it unforeseeable. And it's just the nature of that particular beast, of all the aircraft, military-wise, that I've been aware of. Yeah, exactly, Jason. A lot of moving parts on that aircraft. Of course, there's a lot of moving parts on helicopters, but
in general, right?
This is an aircraft that can, obviously, if you don't know what a V-22 is, the Osprey takes off and lands like a helicopter, but it can transition to forward flight and fly just like a fixed wing aircraft. So it's very, very unique. There's nothing else like it in the world. But because it has so many differences to what you would expect in a standard fixed wing or standard helicopter, it's a horse of a different color when it comes to maintenance. And it's not surprising that the life of the V-22 has had a lot of mishaps with that particular aircraft. So, but the Marine Corps is up to their eyeballs in it now. So
Right.
I do hope that Bell Textron will be able to figure out if there is a common denominator, at least fix this problem. So when the next problem comes along, they'll be able to fix that one too. But it's a dangerous airplane. It's a very, very dangerous airplane to fly.
Well, and everything, I mean, it is very unique. And because it's so unique, it has some unique problems. And
that's a great way to put it. Yes.
When you think that everything that it's capable of doing is, you have either, for everything else, it's just one or the other. And this particular helicopter does everything in that sense. Yeah. As you said, it can do what a regular helicopter, can do. It can't, as far as hover, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's forward flight, just like your fixed wing. So, but all in one. And so it's almost like you have to have two different sets of mechanics to deal with it.
I don't know anything about the mechanical composition of a V-22, and I'd be blowing smoke up your skirt if I said that I did. But I do know for a fact that it's a very, very dangerous aircraft.
Yeah. So my, my thought is that at least take comfort in hearing somebody else's view, such as yourself, Paul, in the fact that in general, with all of the flights that the military has had over the course of their lifetime and the number of incidences that they've had with helicopters and even planes in general, it's very minimal. So, take some comfort in that, and hopefully we will start to see less of them as we progress in the technology ourselves.
We'll see. There are no better trained aviators anywhere in the world than in the U.S. military. There are no better trained mechanics anywhere in the world than the U.S. military. And there are no better manufactured aircraft anywhere in the world than those that are produced for the U.S. military. So it's as good as it gets right here.
There you go. So we've got a couple questions that are out there for you, but while we I'm going to go ahead and put out there to the chats. If anybody has any questions for Paul, go ahead and put them out there now for us. And let's see, Jason had a question about your favorite deployment. Now, you talked briefly about Syria, Okinawa, Canada, and probably I would assume there's some others that were out there. Did you have a favorite place that you were at?
I wouldn't say it was a favorite place. I had a favorite group of guys, favorite squadron, and that would have been the HMA 369 gunfighters on my first pump to Okinawa. We were a very, very tight-knit group, and all flew very well together. We actually had a couple of mishaps on that particular deployment, but that was a group of guys that I would have gone to war with in a heartbeat. They were all extremely well trained, very well prepared, outstanding pilots. Our maintenance guys were superb. They just did a fantastic job keeping our aircraft readiness up. The HMA 369 gunfighters.
And that was out of Okinawa.
Yes.
Awesome. So did you like Okinawa?
Not particularly.
No. And that's
it's
fair.
a little bitty island in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, it is indeed. And a lot of Marines specifically, of course, have been deployed to Okinawa. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. If you're a West Coast Marine, at some point in your career, you will see Okinawa.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see. And then we have, Jason had another question. And that was, do you still have that MiG?
No, and that's a really good question, Jason. When I decided to retire from the air show business, I was going to donate my jet to the Naval Aviation Museum here in Pensacola, and had gone through all the wickets to make that happen. I had flown the NAS Pensacola Homecoming Air Show in November of that year, and actually shed a tear, like, wow, this is the last time I'm going to fly the jet. Now it's going to be in a museum, but that's okay. And I taxied over to the hangar and waited for them to tell me that it was ready to be defueled and the battery taken out, and they were going to tow it over to the museum. Well, through a series of unforeseeable circumstances, that deal, if you want to call it that, to donate the airplane fell through. So I ended up selling it to a gentleman who had been wanting to buy it for a number of time. And he was a former Air Force F-4 pilot, good background, good credentials. I trained him in the aircraft. He did a good job. He was flying for Continental Airlines at the time, but he ended up having a mishap in the aircraft, and sadly, it was underinsured. It was not heavily damaged. It was very repairable, but he had it underinsured. And when the insurance company said, "All right, well, here's your check. Thank you very much. We now own the aircraft," instead of having it repaired or trying to sell it another way, which insurance companies don't typically do, they sold it for parts and pieces. So it was a very, very sad demise to such a historic aircraft that it ended up being, there's no telling, maybe there's a landing gear here or a wing there. I don't have any idea what it is. But,
wow.
But the aircraft essentially no longer exists, unfortunately.
That is sad. So do you know of the other 4 that had been up for sale? Are those still around? Do you know?
One is actually in the museum here in Pensacola now. The other one is in a museum out in Arizona. And I think the other 2 are also in some more relatively obscure museums. But of the 5 that were initially brought over from China, I believe that mine was the only one that ever saw any flight time over here.
Wow. That's got to warm your heart a little bit, right?
Well,
so you were the one who actually broke the barriers and was able to get it done.
Yeah. And you know, I'm a dinosaur. What can I say? Every aircraft that I've ever flown is now in a museum. The UH-1N no longer flies. The AH-1J no longer flies. The Legacy Hornet, the BD-5J, the Bud Light Microjet. You hardly ever see those anymore. And that's a whole different story about flying government contracts and simulating cruise missiles in the Bud Light Microjet. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, like everything that I've, the 727, everything I've flown is now a museum piece.
I didn't even think about the 727. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's really incredible. We've got a couple of comments. So Tennessee Goddess has said she had to go, but said thank you for your service, sir.
You're worth it, Tennessee Goddess. You're worth it.
And then Jason says thank you for your service. Great story. Thank you for sharing.
You're worth it too, sir.
So a couple of things. Let's see if I want to put this resource-wise. So have you ever had the opportunity then to utilize any resources for veterans?
I suppose you could put it that way. I did a lot of pro bono work, not a lot, but I did some pro bono work with the MiG as far as some motion picture stuff that I did, some government contract stuff that I did, an air show occasionally that I did pro bono. I have, as I mentioned, I flew some government contracts simulating a cruise missile in the BD-5J, which if you just look up the Bud Light microjet, you'll see what a BD-5J looks like. It's a little teeny tiny airplane that has a jet engine on it that you put on like a pair of pants. And anyway, it's mainly an air show aircraft, but we did some government contracts with that. Locally, I have been very active with the Veterans Memorial Park Foundation here in Pensacola for a long time. We have a very, very unique park. It's a city-owned park here in Pensacola that has about $3 million worth of monuments in it. We have a monument to World War I, World War II, Korea, Revolutionary War, the Gulf War, Global War on Terror. That particular monument has a piece of the World Trade Center.
Oh, wow.
Incorporated in the artwork. We have our latest monument is a war dog tribute, which is absolutely beautiful. And we have the only half-scale replica of the Vietnam Memorial. They call it the Wall South. That's here in our park. We have a Marine Aviation Memorial Tower. We have a small bronze monument to children of service people. We have a Gold Star Families monument. It's a really, really special place. And we have a stewardship agreement with the city of Pensacola that allows our nonprofit to provide the care of this particular city park. And it is the most pristine park in the city of Pensacola. It's referred to as the jewel on the bay. At night, when all the lights are on and the monuments are illuminated, it's absolutely spectacular. So I have thoroughly enjoyed giving back to the veteran community in that particular way. If you're ever in Pensacola and you have a chance to look at Veterans Memorial Park, it's worth a few minutes of your time to come down and check it out.
And what's the 501c3 or the nonprofit that you work with?
It's the Veterans Memorial Park Foundation.
Okay, so that is that. Okay, yeah. Okay. Awesome. Definitely something we'll need to check out one of these days because it sounds absolutely amazing. More like I'm assuming that's going to be more like a day for me to see that. So like an entire day.
Oh, no, it won't take. You could see the whole thing in an hour, hour and a half.
He'd probably want to stop and look at all of them individually.
It's a very small park.
Is it open then to the public at night as well?
It is. It closes at 10 p.m.
Okay.
We have a roving security patrol that shoos people away, but the lights are on all night long, and but the park is open from early morning hours until 10 p.m. at night.
Wow, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. Are you aware of any other veteran resources, nonprofits there in Florida that we can share?
The local J.R. Spears Detachment of the Marine Corps League here in Pensacola is very active. They do tremendous work. Let's see, there's the Navy League here in Pensacola does a tremendous amount for the local active duty service people. They have been around for a long time and do great work to support the local military community here. I'm told that we have the highest per capita population of veterans right here in Northwest Florida than any other place in the country. So there are lots of different resources here.
That's good. So, yeah. So for veterans that are in Florida looking for certain resources that they might not be aware of, that's some great information for them. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And all right. So again, be sure to check out Paul's books, Mighty Hands, Mr. Mig, and Jasper and the Christmas Fairies. So I'm really excited to get a hold of those and give them a read. They sound really, really interesting.
Yeah. And if you happen to come down to the Pensacola Beach Air Show in July, I'm the air boss for that. Have been for about 30 years now. I really, really enjoy doing that. I'll be the guy at Show Center up on the scissor lift. So come wave and say hello, and come see the Pensacola Beach Air Show. It's free, and it's a really spectacular overwater show out at Pensacola.
You can't beat that.
Oh man, it's a lot of fun.
Make sure to bring some earmuffs or some plugs or something, though. Those things can get loud.
Oh yeah, and some sunscreen, and stay hydrated. It's hot on the beach in July.
Yes. Well, Paul, I really want to say again, thank you very much for all of your service and your sacrifice, and for coming on the show and sharing your story with others, helping them find some other resources that might be beneficial for them as well. So again, thank you for that. And there may be a moment when we hit that 500 mark or some other time, and may call you up and say, hey, you want to join us? We've got some fun thing going on tonight. You never know.
I would love that. I'm so glad that Jim and Tadpole turned me on to your broadcast. I think it's really, really great what you're doing for the veteran community. So thank you also so much for what you're doing. It just justifies my comment when somebody thanks me for my service, and I say, you're worth it. You truly are worth it.
Well, thank you. That's very, very kind. And again, this is for you and all the veterans out there. Just a safe place, a place where we can just have a conversation and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So again, thank you very much. If you want to hang tight, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to wrap it up. So everybody out there, thank you very much for joining. Appreciate you coming out and all the comments. I think I hit all of them, all the comments, all the questions. So we're going to go ahead, get a little bit of music, and then we're going to get out. So hang tight for me, Paul.
Thanks. Super Fidelis.
Everybody else, have a great night, and we will do this again next Sunday night.